Welcome. And today's lesson is dedicated in the memory of Aaron Bushbaum, Zichra Livracha. May his memory be a blessing. And
Yeah.
we'll make our bracha. And I will tell you that if you listened to yesterday's lesson, you heard that I was baffled towards the end of that lesson by what we were reading. And I managed, thank God, really thank God, to take a look more carefully at it. And let's go ahead with the bracha then. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And there's a reason why our oral law is called Mishnah, and it could be based on the word Vishinan tam levanecha. You shall teach it diligently to your children, that we find in the first paragraph of the Shema. And the word lishanot may well be related to the word shnayim, which means two. And that is the fact that some of the material, perhaps all of it, you have to go over it and over it and over it and over it again, because some of it especially is so deep and so complex and maybe so detailed that you cannot appreciate it the first time around just by a cursory examination. So I'm going to do the best I can, given our present circumstances and time and all that, and to move into the lesson. So I'm going to start the share right now. Okay. So this is actually where I was going to start. Okay. But the truth is that we need actually more background than this. And the background is actually found right after the death of Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, at the very beginning of this chapter, or about verse, I think, let's go back here. Make sure I find the place. It may be at the beginning of a Parsha. Okay. Yes. Okay. This is where I'm going to start, at the beginning of Revi'i, verse 12. And here, so it's right after the passage regarding the death of Aaron and of Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's two sons. Aaron is given a direct, it says that God spoke to Aaron alone. It doesn't mention Moses, and he's given the mitzvah of not drinking any strong drink before practicing, and so that they can be as mindful as possible, etc., etc. And then we go on to this here. Vaydaber Moshe el Aharon. So if you need to look at this in the English later, you may want to do that. Vaydaber Moshe el Aharon ve'el Elazar ve'el Itamar banav hanotarim. Moses spoke to Aaron and his sons Elazar and his remaining sons Elazar and Itamar. And here's what he says: K'chu et hamincha hanoteret me'ishei Hashem. Take the meal offering that is remaining from the fire offerings of God, the ichluha matzot etzel hamizbeach, and eat it as wafers next to the altar. We have seen some of these things in the previous and last week's parsha. Ki kodesh kodashim, for they are most holy. Okay, so let's take a look here. Okay, so here we are. K'chu et hamincha. Take this meal offering. Afal pi she'atem onanim. Look at this. So here we have this phrase, this aninut, right, is the condition one is in from the death of a near relative. It's called aninut, and there are halachic implications in that particular state. The kodshim asurim leonein, and here he says that under normal circumstances, sanctified food is forbidden to an onein, to one who's in a state of aninut. And yet here he is giving them an exceptional situation, et hamincha, take this meal offering, and again, the background, right? This mizo minchat shmini uminchat nashon. This refers to the meal offering of the 8th day, that is the consecration, right? The offering of the consecration that went, the meal offering that went along with that, those offerings. Uminchat Nachshon. And remember, we mentioned this Nachshon was the prince of the tribe of Judah and the chieftain of the tribe of Judah, and he brought special dedicatory offerings that are mentioned in the book of Numbers. V'achluha matzot, and eat it as wafers, unleavened, I should say. Ma Talmud Lomar. Okay. So what is Scripture teaching us in this exceptional situation, right? They're in a state of aninut. Aaron has just lost his 2 sons. Nadav and Avihu, Elazar and Ithamar have just lost the same 2 people, their brothers. Lefi shehi minchat tzibur. Okay. Uminchat sha'ah. Okay. And the reason why is that this was a public offering, public meal offering, and a minchat sha'ah. Let's take a look, okay? So, and it was a special offering brought at that particular time. The en keyotze ba ledorot. And this particular ruling, this particular halachic ruling of consuming it is not one that therefore infers for future generations. And for this reason, we're going to explain the other minachot, the other he is explaining in the context of this particular passage here. And it talks about the laws of minachot. Okay? Right. Okay. And it goes on here, it's talking about the thigh of waving and the breast of the brisket of waving and the thigh of heaving, etc., other offerings. Okay, right. Let's keep going. So this is where all this passage here, he's talking to them about the specific, how they still have to behave despite the fact that they're in this very unusual situation of aninut. Okay. And here is the passage which we started reading about the fact that he was looking for the goat of the sin offering. Now, there were a number of sin offerings that were brought on that day, and Rashi explains that it is a specific sin offering. Okay, here we go. And right here, this is the Seir HaChatat. He says, Seir Musafei Rosh Chodesh, right? This is a helpful Rashi. He says, this particular goat was of the additional offerings brought on Rosh Chodesh. And if we were to go to that chapter in Numbers, which I'm not going to do now, please take my word that on Rosh Chodesh, they would bring, the reason why we do a Musaf service on Rosh Chodesh nowadays is because there were additional offerings brought to the daily offering on Rosh Chodesh. And one of those offerings is a sin offering. Ushloshas irei chataot karvu bo bayom. And in fact, there were, as I mentioned just earlier a little bit, right? There were actually 3 goat sin offerings brought on that one day. And he mentions what they are. Okay. Seir izim, right? The regular goat offering. That was brought along with the dedication, right? The consecration of the sanctuary and the priests. Useir Nachshon, the sin offering brought by Nachshon. Useir Rosh Chodesh, and the goat of Rosh Chodesh. Umi kulam lo nisraf, and he says, with regard to all of them, the only one that was burnt, Elazeh, was the one on Rosh Chodesh. V'nechlaku b'davar chochmei Yisrael. And the sages, our early sages of blessed memory, disagreed regarding this matter. What was the nature of their disagreement? Yesh omrim mipnei tum'ah shenagba bo nisraf. There are those who say it was because some kind of impurity got hold of it, touched it, and that's why it was burnt. Veyesh omrim, and there are those who say mipnei aninut nisraf, and some say that it was burned because the priests were in a state of aninut, right? that is Aaron and his sons, and consequently couldn't consume it. And we know from elsewhere that if the parts of an offering, just like with the Pesach, right, what you couldn't consume within the stipulated time had to be burnt. And there were rules about it got to be burnt. And they're saying that because of this aninut, they didn't eat it and it was burnt. Lefi shehu kodshe dorot. Okay, and the reason why is that this is something, of course, since it's the goat that is brought as a sin offering on Rosh Chodesh, every Rosh Chodesh they would be bringing a goat for a sin offering, right? Aval bekodshei sha'ah. But regarding those offerings that were brought at that particular moment, right, on that day, on the 8th day, when the tabernacle was, the consecration ceremonies came to an end, and they were only those offerings brought then. Samchu al Moshe, they relied on Moses, sha'amar lahem b'mincha, because they said with the mincha. Okay, and I need to explain this. You shall eat it as unleavened bread. And the point here is that even though he didn't tell them to eat those goats, and they might not have done it, because Moses had told them to eat the mincha offering, okay, they inferred from that they should also eat the goat as well, that they should also consume the goat. And of course, we know that's what Moses told them right after this had all happened. So he was telling them that even though you're in a state of aninut, you have to eat the goat. But they didn't eat the goat of the sin offering. They only ate the goats of the consecration offerings and Nachshon's offering. Okay? So having that background is terribly important, because what will happen is some of the other stuff is going to it's going to shed light on what we are going to see. And so now we're looking at this narrative in a very different way, right? So they're doing everything fine. And now when Darash, when Moses looks carefully as to what was going on, he sees that they didn't eat the goat of the sin offering, right? Okay. So here is where he says, why didn't you eat it? Right? The sin offering. Okay, just specifically. And here we did all of this yesterday, and I think it was fairly straightforward. So I want to see if I can go to the part where I started to get baffled. Okay. So let's see. Okay. Right. Let me start here. Let me find, if I maybe start right here. Hey, this is Aaron speaking to Moses, right? Hein hayom hikrivu, right? Behold, today let me see. Okay, here we go. Here's the verse. We can take a look at the verse. Vaydaber Aaron el Moshe. Aaron spoke strongly, right? We're going to understand Vaydaber in the way that Rashi's explained it. Aaron spoke strongly to Moses, and he says, behold, today that is his sons, right, offered up their sin offerings and their whole offerings, their burnt offerings before God. Meaning what they of course, one of those was Nachshon's, but regardless, it was their responsibility to actually do the work of the sacrifice. Vatikrena oti kol ka'ele, and this has all happened to me. Va'achalti chatat hayom, were I to eat the sin offering, and incidentally it says chatat hayom, the sin offering of the day. This can also be made if I were to eat a sin offering today. But it could be this day's sin offering. Hayitav beinei Hashem. Would this in fact be acceptable? Would this be considered a proper halachic thing to do? That this would have been pleasing in God's eyes, right? So let's take a look now at the Rashi here, right? Hein hayom hikrivu. Mahu omer. What is he trying to say? And I was looking at the Sefaria interpretation, and I'm sure they were looking at some of the additional. There is, of course, commentary on Rashi himself, and it sounds like it says, look, they already offered. So this sounds like a rebuke to Moses on Aaron's part, is what they say, right? But here we go, what he says. Ella Amar. So just translating the words here, what was he saying, right? Ella Amar Lahem Moshe. Okay, so this is, he says, okay, so he says, I think it's Amar Lahem Moshe, Shema Zaraktem Dama Onanim. Moses said to them, in trying to find out the reason, right? So Moses, we understand this conversation now as Moses trying to find the reason, a decent reason for why this goat was burnt and not consumed. So Moses says to him, perhaps you cast its blood, you sprinkled its blood in a state of aninut, she'anin she'avad chilel. So it says, because a person, an onain, a priest who's in this state of aninut, who performs his service, has defiled the offering. So it's caused it to become defiled, and so consequently, of course, the offering cannot be consumed. Amar lo Aharon. So Aaron said to him, okay, so that's not the reason. V'chi hem hikrivu. Was it they? So when it says they offered, it says, did they in fact offer? Shehem hedyotot, because they are regular priests. They didn't offer it up. They didn't make a mistake and do that and cause it to be defiled. Ani hikravti. I'm the one who brought it up. Sha'ani kohen gadol, because I am a high priest. Umakriv onen. And even when a high priest is in a state of aninut, this is the exceptional situation of a high priest, I in fact am bound to offer up. So I'm the one who offered up that goat. It wasn't because it was defiled in any particular way. Vatikrena oti ka'elu. Okay. And he says, and look at these things that happened to me. Afilu lo hayu hametim. He's saying, even if it wasn't Nadav and Avihu, even in fact, if it were a more distant relationship of mine, such as a brother or a sister, right? Even if the ones who died were not my sons, but any one of the other relatives, on which a regular priest, right? A regular priest is obligated to withhold from his priesthood. He is allowed to become defiled. In fact, it's a mitzvah for a regular priest to become defiled for one of those relatives, right? Ka'elu, like these, like my two sons, kagon kol ha'amurim b'parshat kohanim, like those who are mentioned in Parshat Kohanim. Believe that's where it's Parshat Emor, where it talks about those relations that a Kohen is supposed to defile himself for. She'akonim mitamei alehem, regarding which the priest is supposed to defile for him. So, but I'm a high priest, and I offered up these offerings, and I offered up the goat of the sin offering of Rosh Chodesh, and so, but v'achalti chatat. But he says, but had I eaten this, right? Here we go. So what Aaron's really saying, right, is even if they hadn't been my sons, but these other relatives, it would have been inappropriate for me to eat from the goat. V'im achalti hayitav. If I had eaten from this, would it have been in fact proper? Hayom. During the day. So Aaron, and here he's saying, "Va'aval aninut laila mutar," but the fact is that if you're in a state of aninut at night, there is no problem. Why? Because in fact, in other words, when he's saying aninut here, I think Rashi is just simply saying prior to burial, or ein ela yom kura, because in fact, the aninut only actually holds on the day of the burial, and we don't bury at night. Okay. So, it's as if I think what Aaron is saying is, had it been a time for me to eat this at night, possibly it would have been okay. But I wasn't going to eat during the day. Hayitav be'inai Hashem. Would it have been pleasing before God? Im shamata be'koshei sha'ah. Right. In other words, if you learned out, or if you understood with regards Remember now, Kodshe Sha'ah means the specific offerings brought for that particular time. Ein lecha lahakel. That is not a reason to be lenient. In other words, if there's a leniency involved in eating, and he learned this from what Moses said to him. Remember the first part we said, versus referring to the mincha offering, that they needed to consume it even though they had just experienced this. And even if you want to infer from that, remember that the meat of the offering, not the meal offering now, but that the actual sacrificial parts, that those parts that the Kohanim had to eat of the animal sacrifices, if you can learn that out from what you had said regarding the mincha, ein lecha halakel, but that doesn't mean you can now treat b'kodshe dorot regarding a offering that is going to be offered throughout the generations, and you now know that is the sin offering of Rosh Chodesh. So he was having an halachic dispute with Moses. That's what this is coming out to be, and I'm hoping I've said this carefully enough for you to follow. We've got one little part left here. Vayishma Moshe, Moses understood this. Vayitav be'einav, and this was fitting. He accepted this argument. It was good in his eyes. And here is the Rashi. Vayitav be'einav. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that I disagree with the Sfaria's interpretation of this. I could be wrong, but I believe I'm on good ground here. Hodeh, meaning he, in fact, acknowledged Aaron's argument was good. Velo bosh lomar, and he was not ashamed to say, Moses was not ashamed to say, lo shamati, I did not infer that. I didn't make that inference. I didn't understand. So when it says vayitav be'einav, and it was pleasing in his sight, and this Rashi is going to explain to what degree this was pleasing in Moses' sight, to the point that he wasn't ashamed to admit that he himself hadn't learned that out from the mincha offerings. That is to say, that when it came to Kodshe Sha'ah, that would be okay because the whole situation was exceptional. But the Kodshe Dorot is not an exceptional situation, and one has no right to learn out an exceptional situation from one that is not exceptional. And that is my level of understanding at this point. And so I'm going to stop the share, and I'm very grateful to be able to do this with you today. And I'm happy we have a few minutes if you would like to ask any questions.
Yeah, I do have a question, Rabbi.
Yes.
When Aaron heard his two sons God took him.
Yes.
God took his sons. He was in mourning, and of course, his brother Moses didn't realize this. That Moses said, "You're supposed to eat the offerings of the people that were given to you. God wants you to eat those offerings." And Aaron says, "Wait a minute, I'm in mourning." And then Moses, what he was angry, but he apologized. He said, "You're right. You're not supposed to eat the sin offering. I'm sorry."
Okay.
That's
So
what I
okay.
but I don't know.
Okay. So Harlan, here's the point. It's true that regular priests observe mourning rites and restrictions. A high priest does not. A high priest does not. A high priest in that position as high priest is not allowed to observe mourning rites.
Oh, because he's a priest of the people. The people.
Correct.
And he's
partially.
got to keep going on as a
Correct.
priest.
Correct. And I think in trying to sort of think out rationale for why this is the case is because it has to do with immortality. And that all this stuff actually has to do with developing an immortality for human beings. It's all about immortality. Okay.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
that's what this is all about. And because of that, he is because there is it's as if these souls never died.
So even for his wife or his parents
I want to double
That's
check.
or his children.
So I believe that is the
he's a
law.
high priest.
The
Got
high
to do it,
not.
whether he
A
likes it or
priest
not.
is not allowed to defile himself. Remember, that's what happens when you enter into a room with a corpse, right? You,
Right, but
you
but you can do Shiva and Shloshim and other mourning practices after burial.
right, that don't involve it. As I recollect, there is a passage in Sanhedrin where there's a very interesting passage about how the high priest would do this. Because basically, as I understand it, he would not even follow the bier. So what they would do is they'd be carrying the coffin to the burial place, and he'd be in an alley, one alley behind, and then they turn a corner, and then he could go, because it says actually that he is not supposed to leave the sanctuary. So I think what it's saying, it's understood by that to mean that he's not to leave his sanctified state. That's what it really means.
So and mourning brings you to a lower state, and he's not allowed to do even post
Well,
burial mourning that brings you to a lower state.
I just want to be careful about using the term lower. You follow me?
Well,
Um,
yeah.
but what it means is a less, I think, if you don't mind, saying a less sanctified state. And the fact, yeah, I see what you're saying, because it's not like he's defiling himself in this particular
Well,
case.
like a mourner has to sit on a low bench, so I'm thinking physically, and
Yeah,
everybody is, so
right. Aaron would not do that. I
yeah.
agree. The awesome statements about mourning, something, so that it is and I think I understand these statements so much better now, that talk about how the divine spirit cannot rest if you're kind of depressed, right? That
Hmm.
to be in a state of joy and elation to receive the divine spirit. And I understand it much better now, to the degree that if you don't develop appreciation, because appreciation is the foundation of joy. And I know this as a practice, which is, of course, others have known it long before I ever did. But to consciously think about all the things you have to be grateful for, and to allow those things to penetrate your heart and to penetrate your mind, again, now starts to lift your spirit so that you can thank God for all these things.
Well, when something tragic happens, if you're at that elevated state in your spiritual life, because it's really tough to get there, and most of us aren't there, we're working on it. But if something tragic happens, and if you're in that elevated state, it's not that you're only appreciative of all the positive, good things you've gotten, but you might even appreciate that tragedy that God is giving you this opportunity to deal with and to grow from. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sorry for interrupting you, but yes, I would underline what you're saying. Yes, indeed.
I mean,
Indeed.
I can certainly intellectually appreciate that concept, but in the practical moment, I'm not always there.
I would have to admit that I'm also human, Lauren, and I admitted publicly last Saturday that I have angers that I have to deal with. And you realize that basically the anger comes from moving your mind away from the state of appreciation.
That's right.
But
It's more about frustration and entitlement, and I shouldn't have to deal with this, you
correct.
know. God shouldn't have given this to
I
me.
don't deserve it. I don't deserve it. And no,
Right.
it's such a great spiritual path, right? To rather see these as expressions of divine kindness. There's that passage at the end of Genesis where Joseph, his brothers come to him after Jacob dies, and they're scared he's going to kill them all. And he breaks down after they give him some baloney story, okay, about what Jacob told them, okay, and he says, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to save many lives. And I'm happy to say that, please God, my daughter and I have really tried to hold on to that to rather see everything that God has done actually as expressions of divine kindness. Now, thank God, that my sense of that has not been challenged to such a great degree. I mean, I think of the people going through war-torn parts of the world. How do they deal with that as interpreting that as divine kindness? So I haven't been challenged myself, but I would
Well,
have to.
not that way. You
No,
have.
no, I haven't.
I
No,
mean,
no.
I'm thinking about my father's Alzheimer's and my mother's, Guillain-Barré, even though most of the time I felt frustrated and angry and upset and resented that I had to take care of them and couldn't be taking care of them. But also, I was being given the gift of learning how to, take care of my parents and learning how to have an attitude of appreciation of what I did get from them, even if I'm often angry and feel that I didn't get enough. I had to cultivate appreciating what I did get and appreciating even the opportunity to give back to them, even though part of me sometimes felt like I shouldn't have to be giving to them. They didn't give me enough, but I had to learn how to cultivate that other attitude that's the healthy one. And whenever I could access that, I felt so much better. And I felt good about myself and felt, closer to who I'm supposed to be. And when I'm reactive and frustrated and impatient and I tend to I tend to not see things straight, when I'm that way. I tend to always see the worst in someone's motivations or misinterpret what they're trying to do and don't see the love that's, coming in what they're doing.
I think that's so true. So listen, I just want to say we are recording all of this. I hope you're okay about that. I think it's actually important. I'm
Yeah.
glad we recorded this for anyone who has the patience to, see this the whole way through. But I think I will stop the recording at this time and wish everyone a very happy Pesach.